We went to extreme lengths to work very closely with those customers to understand effectively what their needs were. In other words, validate what we were building and whether or not that actually resonated with a wide enough group in the market to demonstrate that we should continue down this path.
Jeremy, I'm excited to continue our conversation. Now hearing a bit more about your journey, your story. Where did it begin and how did you get to where you are today?
So I have been in the technology ecosystem for my entire career. I'll try to give you the medium version. After graduating college, I went and I had a brief stint at Pfizer. I went on to Morgan Stanley. But my first job out of college was working at a startup called Joltage, which was attempting to build the first back-end system for Wi-Fi. Very early on in the tech ecosystem, we built a startup and eventually went bankrupt. But that was a formative experience in my background in the sense that I probably learned more in those 2 years that I worked at that startup than I did anywhere else. And I made a connection there that has benefited me for the rest of my life, which is my co-founder for my next two companies was the founder of that company. So in 2006, him and I got together and we started effectively the first location-based mobile dating company. We were a pioneer in using location to match people in real time and then form a real-time communication channel from a dating perspective. Whereas dating companies at that time were more, you browse a profile and then you send messages back and forth, like email effectively. We sold that business to Match.com in 2012 or 2013. And a lot of sort of the inspiration for the subsequent companies that I started originated there. And in terms of the problems that we faced and then coming up with solutions for them. So in 2008, we started a company called Xtify. Xtify was the first mobile CRM for the enterprise. And the impetus for that essentially was, how do we leverage this new mobile communications channel, essentially push messages in an effective way? And so after spinning out that business, we very quickly grew to have, many Fortune 500 companies as our customers: Disney, Staples, Old Navy, Sephora, more than I can really remember at this time. And we sold that to IBM as part of their messaging cloud. The common theme throughout those businesses were effectively, how do we better utilize our data? And that was essentially the impetus for us starting Indicative, which I'm the CEO of today.
Amazing how from one effort builds out of multiple, and you started Meet My and
Xtify, yeah.
Xtify around the same time. Do you running both at the same time exactly, or?
So I was the CTO of both of those businesses, and then initially, and then we brought on another CTO at Xtify, and I was a board member and CTO emeritus.
Any lessons learned on running multiple endeavors at the same time?
I mean, it's hard enough running one company, and part of my job basically is saying no more than saying yes. Ultimately, it's having great teams. Being able to delegate, being able to trust people, being able to share a common vision is the only way that worked.
Obviously, those lessons learned taking into now Indicative, building a good team. What was it like to build a team and scale it? Any tactics that you found have worked well that you can share?
So I'd say two things. One, we have a fantastic team today, probably the best team I've ever worked with. So part of that answer to that question is, a lot of the people who I work with today are based on relationships from businesses that I've started in the past. So for example, our VP of engineering is someone who I've worked with for many years. And on that note, he was someone who we had hired effectively out of college. And he has grown incredibly with our company. So the other sort of tip I would sort of say is, don't be afraid of bringing on junior talent and then mentoring them to grow. As you know, when these companies were startups, we were cost constrained. And so we couldn't afford, to hire someone with 10 years experience, but that doesn't mean that someone with just a great attitude and just pure raw intelligence with some training can't be incredibly effective. And that's been a model that we've been able to employ across many roles, whether it be marketing or sales, is investing in people who are junior and finding sort of those diamonds in the rough, giving them the opportunity to grow, giving them responsibility, and seeing them develop into effectively top tier talent.
Powerful strategy of not necessarily hiring the best out of the best and bringing them in, but junior and building them up, and they actually maybe go from one business endeavor to the next business endeavor that you have.
I'd say it's one of my best growth hacks.
I love it. How big is the team today at Indicative?
We're about 20, 25 people.
Nice. And this concept of the culture, keeping it at different stages, I'm sure has its own unique challenges. Coming to the customer side, what is it like to get the first couple customers? Now that this is your third or fourth business year endeavor, how do you get that first initial customer on board and be able to grow from there?
Well, to take a step back, I think what you're really referring to is how do you get to product market fit? And so, the approach that we took is, we have a thesis about what we're building. We went to extreme lengths to work very closely with those customers to understand effectively what their needs were. In other words, validate what we were building and whether or not that actually resonated with a wide enough group in the market to demonstrate that we should continue down this path. And we made a couple pivots in all of the companies I've worked at, frankly, in terms of learning about what is responsive to the market. My best way of the way I think about that is really extreme feedback. Whether you're a B2C or a B2B, it's really taking the time to sit down, listen to your customers, and distill from them what they're trying to tell you. In other words, a customer may not necessarily tell you, you should change this in your product, but if you ask the right questions, you could understand the pain point they're trying to solve and incorporate that into your macro thesis about your business, about your product, and inform those decisions. Your first customer who you get may not necessarily be representative of your next customer or even your ideal customer. And that can be an opportunity in saying, hey, maybe we should tilt the business a little bit to the left, or it might mean we should double down on this type of customer and plow forward.
Going from that first few customers after you found product market fit to then scale, has there been any tactics, both with Indicative or previous ventures, that you found have worked to then actually start scaling up and getting more?
Yeah, I think there are things that you can do when you're small that don't scale. And I think you should embrace those. So, very often we'll look at doing something that will only get us to the next stage. And we're like, oh, but this will never work when we're much bigger. And, that creates friction. That creates a hesitancy to do those things. But those might be the things that you need to do at that stage of your business. And so, what I would say is don't hesitate from embracing those tactics or those strategies that only serve you in the short term. Now, I don't want to say that you shouldn't also be focusing on a larger strategy or understanding what you should be in a different stage. But there are tons of little things you do at a lower scale that are necessary to get you to the next stage, the next plateau, the next funding round or something that will not work when you're 20, 50, 100 people, but that work amazingly when you're 5 or 10 people.
Any come to your memory of one that didn't scale, but you're like, no, actually, hindsight, that I'm glad we did it because we needed to do that. Anything tactical come to your mind?
Yeah, look, the customer feedback example, I think it's a really good one. I try to early on, speak to every single customer we have. I can't do that anymore today. But, for what it's worth, that concept we can extend and scale. So now our customer success team does QBRs with a lot of our customers. And the insights from that are distilled. And, I still look at those every single time we see them. But I can't hop on the phone with every single customer.
For you moving forward, what hurdles do you see you're going to need to overcome? Especially, I don't know if the COVID era changed anything for you, maybe not. What do you see challenges both internally with your team as well as externally with your clients that you're going to need to overcome?
Yeah, COVID has obviously been, I think, a challenge for every business. And it's, I think, to maybe put a positive spin, it's also been an opportunity. Us, like every other business, is figuring out how we can work in a time where showing up face-to-face is no longer possible, where we can't get together and work collaboratively. But on the other hand, I think bringing to the forefront awareness around making sure that people are okay, people are coping, people are, we can be more responsive to people's individual needs, both in terms of their family lives. I think that's an awareness and a change that has come from COVID that I think is really positive, and I hope that persists in how business operates in the future when things return to quote unquote normal. This awareness of just being more mindful of people. And I think, not that necessarily it's a challenge we have to overcome, but I think returning back to the standard quo is something that we should be wary of. I think, I've enjoyed working remotely to some extent. Is that something that we can sustain? How do we keep in touch over long distances? I think that's an interesting one also. How do we keep that culture going, and how does our culture evolve? Are challenges that I don't think we have the answers to yet given the uncertainty we face in market today.
I actually was going to ask that as a follow-up, as I'm curious, ask a lot of folks, do you see bringing everyone back into the same office? Are you going to go all remote now with the team? Have you any thoughts on that?
I think we're just going to have to wait and see. I think the first thing is we're not going to make anybody do anything. I think when the time comes, we'll figure out what people are comfortable doing, and then we'll decide then. We're not at a place where we can even begin to speculate on what's going to happen. I can say this: we've been able to transition to working remotely incredibly effectively. My team has done an absolutely tremendous job of not skipping a step when it came to working remotely. And at the same time, it's impossible to see what will happen on the other side.
Two last quick questions. Any places you go to get new insight information as a business tech leader, whether it's books, podcasts, journals, where do you go?
So, I think all of your listeners probably go to Hacker News probably fairly routinely. That's been an informative, interesting source for me for years. And obviously the comment section is fun to peruse. Given how busy things are these days, I find it really hard to dedicate time to just sit down and read a book. So I haven't read a business book, embarrassingly, in like a year and a half, 2 years. One newsletter that I read religiously, though, is, and I'm going to butcher his name, but Tom Tunges from Redpoint is a VC who sends out a weekly newsletter, and he focuses on the SaaS space, on the data space, but it's bite-sized. It's the kind of email you can read in 3 minutes, and it's just filled with interesting insights and thoughts. That's one that I read almost weekly, if not going back to the archives and looking at interesting topics from time to time.
Last question for you. What kind of technology innovations do you predict we'll see in the near term, next year, and the long term, 5-10 years?
So, obviously, sort of from the data space, I think a faster time to insights and a reduction of the friction from getting to those insights, I think is inevitable. We're clearly moving in that direction with ML and AI and plugging these models into effectively doing the analysis that we're doing together. I think a interesting area that I don't have a good answer for you in terms of how it's going to go, but is the intersection of social media, news, politics, and human behavior. I'm fascinated by that topic and frightened by it also, because I observe just in my own behavior how I am addicted to my phone. I'm addicted to scrolling down and doing all those behaviors, which I can clearly see are very unhealthy. And I think understanding those is going to be one of the big challenges of the future. But also from a technology perspective, how do we coexist with this technology that is just giving us dopamine hits every 30 seconds?
Have you seen a company using AI, machine learning, or other technology to transform the way we live, work, and do business? Go to uptechreport.com and let us know.